Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, February 9th, 2006. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. Well, this week we talked to Chris Colby, editor of Brew Your Own magazine, about American Pale Ales, one of my favorite styles of beers. It's a style with a lot of flexibility, and it's a great way to enter the hobby of home brewing for the first time. Now, but before we get into our discussion with Chris, I want to say hello to a lot of new listeners out there. Basic Brewing Radio and Basic Brewing Video were featured fairly prominently on the iTunes Music Store podcast directory over the past week, and we're seeing an increase in traffic as a result of that. So welcome to those who are new to the show. I had a bit of a hectic day this past Friday. I noticed that the Basic Brewing Video logo was right on the iTunes podcast directory homepage, and it still may be, for all I know. Our logo was directly under the picture of Lala from Tiki Bar TV, so we're bound to have gotten some attention. The category that we were featured in was wine, beer, and mixology. So I checked the list of the day's top podcasts under the category of food, and our video podcast was number 3, and the audio podcast was numbered 9. So, that's not bad. 2 out of the top 10 food podcasts as ranked by the iTunes Music Store podcast directory. So it's great, right? Well, except for one thing. I got an email, a nice polite email from my ISP who hosts the Basic Brewing site, congratulating me on our popularity, but letting me know that something had to change because apparently the traffic to basicbrewing.com basically filled up the pipes going to their servers. So, as a result, some of you might have noticed a slowdown in downloading our podcasts last week, but I hope that I fixed it. I've since moved those video files to another service that has unlimited bandwidth, so we should be okay. And downloads of the video podcast more than doubled as a result of the exposure on the iTunes Music Store. And speaking of the video podcasts, I have in my possession the 6-pack of homebrew from Rick of Big Foamy Head as a payoff for our little bet on whether Steve and I would get a full 6 out of the IPA we've been working on the video show. We did indeed get a full 6-pack of beers, and we had a half a bottle of sides to try on the show. And thanks to Rick for being such a good sport on that. And the episode with Steve and me is now posted on bigfoamyhead.com, so go check it out. And we had a lot of fun. It was kind of interesting to be on the other side of the interview fence. And thanks to everybody, by the way, who wrote in to tell us that we double-primed one of the bottles of IPA on the video podcasts. We were using Cooper's carbonation drops to prime, and we got a little mixed up as we were bottling. It couldn't have been anything to do with the fact that we had just been sampling homebrew during our Big Foamy Head interview that we did right before we started taping the video podcast. So, anyway, I noticed the double priming as we were shooting, and I marked the bottle afterwards so that we can see the effects of the double priming on a later show. That is, if the bottle doesn't blow up between now and then. Now, on to our interview with Chris Colby of Brew Your Own magazine. In the March-April issue of BYO, Chris wrote about American Pale Ales, and he joined us to talk about one of our favorite styles of brew.
Hey, James. How's it going?
Very good. We're talking about today one of my favorite beer styles, especially the ones I make at home, the American Pale Ales. And I take it from your article that it's one of the more popular styles overall.
Yeah, well, I think for a lot of homebrewers, it's perhaps the reason they started homebrewing. I mean, I know the first couple beers that I made were American Pale Ales, and from, the feedback we get from BYO readers, I know a lot of people brew them, quite a lot.
And why is that? Is it because the style is so easy to brew, or the definition of the style is so wide? What is it?
I think a big part of it is that a lot of homebrewing in the U.S. is a reaction against the fizzy yellow lagers that a lot of us grew up, drinking. when American Pale Ales came out, they were the first, for a lot of people, the first real taste of hops. And, when, while a lot of people, there might be certain styles that they like, this was a style that sort of inspired people that, I want to go out and brew this. And that's just my take. I think, the big reason is just that it's so different from American Pilsners that it really got people to sit up and take notice and want to brew.
It's really, really a flavorful style. It's easy to brew in the technical sense in that, it's pretty forgiving as far as temperatures and ingredients. And I think that it's an excellent first brew for people to get into if they're getting into home brewing for the first time.
Yeah, you've definitely got sort of a fat middle to work with in an American Pale Ale. There's nothing, there's no part of the style that, can't be a little more of this or a little less of that. I mean, you have room in the color and the hop bitterness and the, and the strength and everything. And the procedures are simple too. For it's a straight single infusion mash, so it's a good first all grain beer too. About the only problem that people may have, especially extract brewers, is just getting enough hop bitterness into the style. Other than that, it's pretty straightforward. A good starter beer.
And what's the key to getting the hop bitterness? What are the stumbling blocks that people get into in trying to get enough hop bitterness into the beer?
For extract brewers, it's mainly just boil volume. If you're boiling a concentrated wort on your stovetop and if you're only boiling like 1.5 or 2 gallons, you're unlikely to be able to get enough hop bitterness extracted from the hops to, once you dilute that to 5 to make it worthwhile. And, if extract brewers could at all manage a full wort boil, that would solve the problem. Or if they could at least, just boost the volume that they boil up to. It depends on the level of hop bitterness you're trying to reach, but if you could at least get it up to 3 gallons, if not 4, you'd be doing a lot better towards brewing these hoppy styles of beer.
And we've talked both with you and on other podcasts as well about playing with if you're an extract brewer and doing a split boil, playing with the amount of extract that you start with in your boil. We've gained a lot of listeners thanks to iTunes, a lot of new listeners. So maybe can you go over that theory briefly just to catch new listeners up to speed?
Sure. Yeah, if you're making an extract beer and you're boiling a condensed wort, where you're boiling less than the volume of the batch size, like let's hypothetically say you're boiling 2.5 gallons in a 5-gallon batch. What you want to do is add only a part of your malt extract to start. If you're boiling about half the wort volume, I'd go with about half the amount of malt extract, and boil that, and then make your hop additions during the boil as the recipe states. And then you have one of two options. You can either add the remaining malt extract with 15 minutes left to go in the boil. You can just sort of turn the heat off, stir it in, and then resume heating. Or you can add it right at knockout, right when the boil timer runs out, and then you can just stir it in, cover the brew kettle, and let it sit for 15 minutes just to sanitize the malt extract. And you should one hint: you should use liquid malt extract when you do a late addition for two reasons. One is if it's good liquid malt extract, the kind that came or is designed to go to breweries, it should have been boiled and then condensed, so you don't really have to boil it again. And secondly, if you add a powder to boiling liquid, it's going to foam up a lot. And so if you add dried extract late in the boil, despite the fact that it might not have been boiled, it's going to foam a lot, and you just should use liquid to avoid that.
That's interesting, because the liquid is hopefully canned and sterile in its package, right?
Mm-hmm. You can use canned, or you can use stuff that's come from a barrel at your local home brewing shop, I mean, either one will work because you're going to expose it either to 15 minutes of boiling or 15 minutes of heat, after the boil but before cooling. So the heat will sanitize it, so it doesn't need to be from a can.
You just got to make sure that the liquid malt extract is fresh,
right?
As we've talked about in our discussions with Bob Hansen from Brees. Liquid malt extract is more susceptible to staling and darkening and off flavors that come with aging than powder.
Right, because it's got water in it, and that's sort of the catalyst. Not sort of, but is a catalyst for the reaction.
Well, you've got a nice spread in BYO on American Pale Ales this month, or this issue. And one thing that I really liked about the article is you had the chance to talk to professional brewers about American Pale Ales and about their philosophy of brewing American Pale Ales. What did you find, and did you find any surprises by talking to them?
Well, I learned a few interesting things. I talked to a number of commercial brewers, including Richard Norgrove of Bear Republic. I talked to Vinny Chilurzo of Russian River, Lee Chase from Stone, Nick Floyd from Three Floyds, Peter Zane from AleSmith, and a few other people too, which I can't remember right off the top of my head. But anyway, what I found, I talked with quite a variety of people. Brock Wagner from St. Arnold, also someone from Saranac. But anyway, what I found was, and it's not too surprising, was there's a lot of different views, a lot of different philosophies that people use when they go into making a beer like this, an American Pale Ale, or a hoppy American beer in general. A couple of questions I asked them specifically that drew out a lot of different answers was, I asked them what kind of malt bills would they use for an American Pale Ale. Would these be, complex or simple? And that got a variety of answers. I asked about using hops that are high in cohumulone. Some people say that you should avoid these because they're harsh, and I got a variety of answers on that. And I also asked a question that more applied to double IPAs, and that is, should you add hops at many times during the boil, especially when you have mid-addition or mid-boil addition hops, or should you just add them, should you have bittering hops at first and then flavor and aroma hops at the end? And that, again, got a wide variety of responses. So it was interesting that of all these people who brew, and very successfully brew, hoppy beers that home brewers like, there wasn't a strict consensus on all these questions that, you have to do it this way or, your beer doesn't work. So it shows that, we've got a lot of freedom in how to brew this style.
It kind of goes along the lines of when we talked to David Myers in the last podcast about meads. He said if you ask 10 different home brewers their theories on how to make meads, you get 14 different answers.
Yeah.
So, it is a hobby and a profession that allows for freedom of expression, kind of a freedom of creativity. And it seems like this style really fits that.
Yes, definitely. This is, if you want to brew a beer that's noticeably of the, American Pale Ale style, you have a few boundaries that, you don't want to cross. If the beer is too dark, it's not really going to be considered an American Pale Ale. If it's lacking in that, citrusy American hop character, it's not really going to be regarded as an American Pale Ale. But even within those boundaries, you have a lot of freedom.
So let's get to the nuts and bolts and talk about the ingredients. When you're formulating a recipe for an American Pale Ale, do you have to be concerned about the water?
You need to be concerned about the water only in as far as that it's, good, flavorful water. Basically, you have, here's the part where of brewing American Pale Ales where you really do have a fat middle. You want, the ideal water would be something that's low in carbonates, under perhaps 50 parts per million, and high in calcium with, levels perhaps 100 to 250 parts per million, and you can get there if your water doesn't have that much calcium by just adding either gypsum or calcium chloride. But 100 to 250, that's a pretty huge range, and even that's I wouldn't say hard and fast. You could be below that or above that and still brew a good beer. And likewise with the carbonates, probably most waters are going to be under 50, but even if they were a little over that, especially if you had some calcium on top of that, they would be fine. This is a good style for extract brewers to prepare some water because they know really what they need, and it's just calcium. They don't have to worry about the details of the mash. So what extract brewers can do is simply start out with either soft water or distilled water or RO water, and just add about a teaspoon, maybe 2 for every 5 gallons they use, and they're good to go.
And if you're a beginning brewer, I always say don't worry too much about your water. Just make sure that you address the chlorine issue.
Carbon filter your water, or for an extract brewer, all you're going to need really is maybe a gallon beyond what the batch size is. Just clean and sanitize your fermenter the day before. Put your water in there. Throw in a Camden tablet or even half a Camden tablet. Cover it loosely and let it sit overnight, and the next day your chlorine's gone.
And what about the grain bill? If you're an all-grain brewer and you're wanting to make a good, solid American Pale Ale.
Well, the backbone of any American Pale Ale, of course, is pale malt and a little bit of crystal malt, usually 5 to 10%. As far as pale malts go, a lot of American Pale Ales are brewed, with domestic 2-row pale malt. But you're not really shackled to that. If you want to, go with an English Pale Ale malt, that's certainly not going to, knock you out of the category. Likewise, European lager malt or a Pilsner malt might work well. And you can even, blend a couple base malts if you wanted to bring out, a little bit of complexity that way. Crystal malts, you're shooting for a beer here that's, it's pale. That's in the name. But it has, in the flavor, there's a little bit of caramel sweetness, and there's, a little bit of sort of red, orangey hues to the beer. And so you want to go with some medium crystal malts, something in the 30 to 60 Lovabond range. And, figure out to add enough of those that your color, gets in the range of, basically sort of a light golden to, almost red. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, there's American red ales that expand that range to, into the dark reds. But for a strictly pale ale, you'd want something light golden to red.
I've been making an Amarillo. I call it a pale ale. I guess it's a pale ale, but I've been brewing this beer lately, and this is my favorite beer right now. It's basically 10 pounds of 2-row, 1 pound of 60 Lovabond crystal as the malt bill, and then using an ounce of Amarillo hops for bittering, half an ounce for flavoring, and half an ounce for aroma, and then a California ale yeast. And the stuff is just wonderful. It's a little darker than I thought it would be. It's a little more toward the red than the pale, golden that I was looking for. But after tasting it, I don't care. My taste buds don't care what color the beer is.
Well, Amarillo hops are fantastic. I mean, and that's something else that came out later in the article, is that's really, at least if the brewers I talked to were any indication, that's sort of the up-and-coming hop for these styles. But, you can, a really simple grain bill like, 90% 2-row and 10%, crystal, that works a lot. I just made an English pale ale on that same basis recently, and it turned out good. And, that's perfect. And this was something we got into later in the article. You can brew these beers with a very, very simple malt bill, or you can go sort of, everything but the kitchen sink and throw in, a lot of other supporting malts for just a hint of complexity.
Now, there's one recipe that you've got in the article, the Patrick Henry Pale Ale, that calls for 1/8 of an ounce of chocolate.
Yeah,
malt.
that's like 3 little grains of chocolate. That's hardly anything.
Just wave the chocolate malt over the mash tun.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, all that is this is actually the Patrick Henry Pale Ale recipe, and there's right out of my brewing notebook. I made this last year and liked it a lot.
Now, can you taste the chocolate malt in that small quantity?
No. All that is at that amount is just a slight color adjustment. When you add a little bit of a very dark malt, below the level that any flavor at all is detectable, what it'll do is it adds a little color, not hardly enough to notice, but what it does is it changes the hue of the color. You get, if your beer is sort of ambery, it'll change it to more sort of coppery colored. Like the red will have more brown in it than yellow, I guess. I don't know the color theory behind it, but I just know what it does. and yeah, a lot of people do that. Just a little bit of a tiny bit of. It can be chocolate. It can be roasted barley. It can be even black patent or something. Although with the higher Lovibond ones, you have to sort of be very careful to keep the additions small. But
yeah, like I say, that pound of a 60 Lovibond Crystal really kind of surprised me at how much impact it did have. With all that 2-row, just a pound of the 60 Lovibond really made an impact on the color.
Yeah, a pound of 60 is going to get you into the nice, into a nice red sort of. That had a little bit of a copper tint to it.
Oh yeah. It's a beautiful beer, and the nice creamy head as well. And does the crystal have an impact on head retention as well, or the body of the beer?
It has an effect on the body of the beer, or at least it has an impact on the amount of residual sugars and the sweetness. And I'm not sure if it's strictly the body, but it does add a certain fullness to the beer. I'm actually not sure about head retention.
It's got a really good mouthfeel of this beer. In an American Pale Ale, the front of the stage is not necessarily the grain bill, but it's your hop selection, right? I mean, that's the thing that really stands out in an American Pale Ale.
Right. I mean, most malt, or most American Pale Ales, they have enough malt to support the hops, but the malt bill isn't really, the star of the show. It's the hops.
And you mentioned the C's, the citrusy American hops. In this style, is it traditional to stick with a single hop variety in the beer, or do you mix those, or what kind of flexibility do we have within the style?
Oh, you have a lot of variety, or a lot of flexibility. There are a lot of commercial American Pale Ales on the market that are brewed with just a single hop variety, and there's others, probably more, that are brewed with multiple hop varieties. You can really just throw in either whatever hop single variety you like, or you can throw in a mix of different hops that if you like their different characters. You've got a lot of freedom.
What are your favorites?
I don't know. I still like Cascade quite a bit. I know a lot of people think that's kind of boring with years. I also like Centennial a lot. I like Chinook. Columbus is okay. I really like Amarillo. That's one that's moving into almost all of my pale ales I brew these days. For bittering hops, I like Simcoe. That's really good. I also like Magnum. That's one thing for American Pale Ales. You can, for your bittering hop, all you really need is something that's relatively clean and relatively high alpha, because you're going to get a lot of flavor and aroma from the late addition hops. So you don't, at least personally, I think you don't need to think too hard on what your bittering hop is. Just get something that's high alpha, and that doesn't otherwise clash with the rest of your plan for the beer. But yeah, there's a lot of hops I like. And certainly in an American Pale Ale, you can throw in just about anything. I mean, you do want to get some of that citrusy American style hop if you're really trying to brew, something labeled an American Pale Ale. But it certainly can be cut with other hops that you enjoy.
Are there any hops that are out as far as outside the range of American Pale Ale styles?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, certainly there's no hop I can think of that. I mean, well, there are hops that you wouldn't want to brew, as you wouldn't want to use like a noble hop as your only hop addition.
Mm-hmm.
But you could certainly blend any hop that I can think of. You certainly could at least blend in with other hops as long as you have, a little bit of that citrus in there.
We talk about hops kind of like the fashion industry. What's hot this year in the hop on the hop stage. And I guess, that determines a lot, or is determined a lot about, or by availability. If you can't get Simcoe or Amarillo, then, you're not going to be using it.
Amarillo acreage this year is supposedly way up. I noticed that, it's been sparse the last couple of years because the interest in it has been so great. And I noticed my local homebrew shop this year has it in leaf form, or not leaf form, cone form.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually got a chance to brew with some Amarillo whole hops. The first time I made this favorite beer of mine, and then the second time I made it was with pellets, and I couldn't tell that much of a difference between the two. They both were very good beers, so I tend to like the pellets for boiling and the whole hops for dry hopping, just for convenience sake.
Yeah, a lot of homebrewers work it that way. Pellets are really convenient, and a lot of commercial brewers use pellets. Basically, for commercial brewers, the decision of pellets versus cone hops is going to be just how their brew house is engineered.
Mm-hmm.
There's not. I think some homebrewers have the idea that whole hops are like better in quality or more refined or something, but at the very least, commercial brewers don't seem to draw that distinction. It's all just how are they going to handle, the boiling, the wort, the separation, and all that. And for homebrewers, I would say just pick whatever you like to work with and works best with your setup. For me, that's pellet hops, and then when I do dry hopping, I'll go with cone hops because it's just easier to keep together in the keg, and they don't form that sludge in the bottom of the keg, and you're blowing out the little hop pellet chunks into every glass.
Using Ray Daniels' analogy of bittering units to gravity units, what kind of ratio of bittering are we looking at with this style?
Well, you've got a pretty good range. Peter Zane, in the article he's from AleSmith, he thinks that a 1-to-1 ratio is pretty good for American Pale Ales, and that's fairly hoppy, which is fine. Certainly well within, the homebrew contest style guidelines and commercial practices. You really have a pretty good range in there. Sierra Nevada would be, 35, 50. There's 37 IBUs to 52 gravity units or something like that, so they're a little under one. There's certainly some, and I couldn't probably rattle them off the top of my head, that are probably above that. You've got a wide range. One thing I mentioned in the article is a lot of homebrewers have, some way to calculate their IBUs, and, these are great tools to help you come up with your recipe. But one thing I mentioned in the article is you really got to taste your beer and see if you're getting the level of hops you want, and then if you're not, you have to sort of ignore the numbers that your computer program or your spreadsheet is spitting out, and just do what you got to do, because those numbers are just, they're helpful, but they're just estimates. They're not measurements on your system. Right.
And that's what Ray Daniels talked about too when we talked to him about bittering, was that these IBU calculations are estimates, and you're trying to just get in the ballpark. And especially with bigger gravity beers, your taste buds are not going to be as sensitive. So These are ballpark calculations, and the proof of the beer is in the tasting, so to speak. Just take good notes and make sure that you list what hops you used and what alpha acids and what quantities and for how long, and so that if it's not bitter enough for you or too bitter, you can make adjustments later on.
Yeah, definitely. For all grain brewers and for people who boil their entire wort, they're going to be able to adjust their bittering levels fairly easily. Just add more hops or add less hops, or boil them a little longer or a little shorter. For extract brewers who do a concentrated boil, they're going to have to work a little bit harder. Specifically, if you're not getting enough, if you're adding, a decent amount of hops but not getting the bitterness you think you should be getting out of them, extract brewers should boil either more wort, try to boil like a gallon more wort total than next time, or do the extract late thing, so that you're boiling at a sort of reasonable boil gravity, and then just add all the, or half of the fermentables later in the boil.
Now, we talked about grain bill for all grain, but I think we've neglected our extract brewers. What is your advice for extract brewers in determining? I would assume you go with the light malt extract.
Yeah, start with a light malt extract pale base. Like you could use just light or extra light dried malt extract for your initial extract addition. You can either steep some crystal, or you could do a small partial mash with a little bit of crystal and a little bit of pale malt. In the recipe section, the second recipe I give is an extract recipe, and it's got a small partial mash with it's actually crystal and a little bit of Munich, because it's a more of a red beer. And that's basically it. I mean, just pale malt base. You can use crystal, and you can use any of the other specialty malts that an all grain brewer might use to add a little complexity, and then just either a steep or a small partial mash, and you're good to go.
Simple. Simple and good.
Very simple. In this style, you want to keep, you certainly have a lot of leeway in how complex your malt bill is, but you want to, at least to my reckoning, you want to keep it like one step less complex than your hop bill, because you want the hops to be the star of the show.
And you can always add ingredients later on with subsequent batches.
Oh, yeah.
If you want to get a little bit more complex. And finally, let's talk about yeast. This is definitely something that you're wanting to be in the background and not be in the forefront as far as the taste profile, right?
Yeah, American Pale Ales tend to be brewed with what people call clean ale yeasts. They don't produce a lot of the fruity esters that English, your typical English yeast strains do. The classic strain is the strain that people sometimes call Chico or whatever. It's in homebrewers, it's represented by Y Yeast 1056 or White Labs California Ale, or there's now a dried yeast version of it from Safe Ale, and those all work really well. Both Y Yeast and White Labs also have a second American strain, I think. In Y Yeast, it's 1272, if I recall correctly, and I think for White Labs, it's called California 5 Ale. And, those work pretty well, too. And you also have, there are other strains that are sometimes used for other styles of beer, but, you can get away with using them in an American Pale Ale. A Kolsch strain, those aren't overly fruity. Those will work well. A Scottish Ale strain. Or even any English strain, as long as you just pitch big and, aerate well and control your temperature so that you're not getting, the maximum amount of fruit out of it. There are some commercial American Pale Ales that have, a little bit of that English fruitiness to them, and it's not completely forbidden in the style. You just want to sort of minimize it.
And again, these are just suggestions, and if you want to deviate from the typical style, you're a home brewer. You can do that.
One thing in the article I point out is that the style has, the basic American Pale Ale style has morphed into or expanded into a lot of new ground. I mean, there's also, what our people call alternately either American Red Ales or American Amber Ales. And these are basically just, American Pale Ales with more crystal malt in them, a little bit more color. And then on the hop scale, American Pale Ales have, also given rise to American IPAs, which are just very hoppy versions and more and stronger versions of an American Pale Ale. And then those have morphed into the double or imperial IPAs, the huge hop monsters that, guys like Dogfish Head are brewing, or, Vinny Chilurzo out at Russian River, or the guys at Three Floyds, or, any of those people putting out just the, just the monster beers.
Yeah, I'm wondering what's next,
Yeah.
How can you get more extreme?
In terms of hop bitterness, those beers are at the wall right now. There's two limits, and these aren't super well researched, but there's some evidence to point out that if you're just plain boiling hops, the level of alpha acids you can get into wort is somewhere, I've seen estimates anywhere from 100 to 120 IBUs. Beyond that, it's sort of like adding more and more sugar to lemonade. There's a point where it doesn't dissolve and it just, sediments out. Likewise, there's a point, at least as far as IBUs are concerned, that adding hops doesn't make the beer any more bitter. It might add more flavor and aroma, but it doesn't add it more bitter. And secondly, there's just a level that your taste buds can detect. There's a level over which, even if you could have beers that were 200, 300 IBUs, your taste buds just wouldn't. They'd just be bombarded. And that limit, I've heard, is also sort of coincidentally around 100. So in terms of hop bitterness, I mean, brewers, and some are, from what I've heard, are resorting to, hop extracts to get the actual alpha levels up in the kettle. They'll boil a lot of hops, but then they'll add, just straight extract.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think, it's going to be harder to get actual more bitterness in there. Maybe by playing with things they can get the perception of bitterness up.
So we need Chuck Yeager to go into brewing.
Yeah. Yeah, we need some sort of NASA initiative to help us make more bitter beers.
I'd go for tax dollars to go for that.
Yeah. Well, given what a lot of tax dollars go for today, I think this would be money well spent.
Well, Chris, I appreciate your spending time with us again.
James, thanks for calling. It was fun.
Thanks again to Chris Colby of Brew Your Own Magazine for helping us out again. You can get a free copy of the current issue of BYO by clicking on the banner on basicbrewingradio.com. And if you subscribe after reading your free issue, you'll be helping to support this podcast. I'm coming down to the wire on editing our all-grain DVD. I know you're tired of hearing about it, but you can still find a special pre-release version of the DVD at basicbrewing.com/grain. That's basicbrewing.com/grain. I'm going to chain myself to the computer in the next couple of days to force myself to finish that project up. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say hey, write to james@basicbrewing.com or fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And don't forget to tell us where you're from. And if you're wanting to get into home brewing for the first time, while you're on our site, you can check out our DVD, Basic Brewing, Introduction to Extract Home Brewing. We'll walk you through the process step by step, and you can see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVD. And if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order it online. But that's all until next week. Until then, thanks for listening. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dodson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time. So long.